Rev up your engines!
Help me please, Scotty says. Scotty, I got a Nissan Altima 2003. Check engine light came on. Took it to AutoZone. It said P0302. I changed the spark plugs. That didn't fix it. P0302 means cylinder number 2 is misfiring. Now, unfortunately, it's often not as simple as it seems. You think it says misfiring, so the spark plugs aren't firing right. It just means that that cylinder is not firing correctly. It can be spark plugs. It can be the ignition coil. It can be wiring. It can be the fuel injectors. If they don't give the right amount of gas, it can misfire. It can be the head gasket starting to blow on cylinder number 2. It can be lots of things that make a vehicle misfire. And unfortunately, a lot of people see the code, oh, it's misfiring, so something's wrong with the ignition system. It doesn't necessarily have to be the ignition system. When you diagnose it, of course, start with a simple thing. Change the spark plugs. If that doesn't fix it and you got coil on plug, move the number 2 coil to, say, the number 1, and move the number 1 coil to the number 2. Then if you find out now it's misfiring on the number 1 and not the 2, you know the coil's bad. Swap parts around for that and pray that one of those swapping fixes it, because if not, it can easily be on those engines. An 03 Altima, those are notorious for blowing head gaskets. And it could be that your head gasket is starting to blow on number 2, and that's a whole bunch of money. More than that Altima is really worth if you got to rebuild the engine. In that case, I'd say just get rid of the car. If you had a bunch of tests done and see the engine's going out, get rid of it. Don't put the money into it because it's not worth it. They're bad quality control to begin with, and when the engines go, that's the beginning of the end. You don't want to throw a whole bunch of money into it. It's not worth it. King is for good said, Scotty, what mods or parts can I change to gain a bit of horsepower in my car? I have a CVT and make it a little faster. Today, modern cars get as much horsepower as they can for good gas mods the way they're designed. If you really want more horsepower, you have to do radical modifications, supercharger, turbochargers, rebuild the engine with better pistons, higher compression ratios. All the other stuff is just a bunch of nonsense that hardly does anything. It's been proven that putting those cold air intakes, sometimes you actually get less horsepower on them unless they're tuned by a professional. You're not going to get much anyways unless you spend a bunch of money. You got a CVT transmission. Not a smart idea to put a lot of horsepower in one of their weaker transmissions to begin with. Even back in the day, if somebody had a big block Chevy and they wanted horsepower, they put a supercharger on it, they'd have to either rebuild or replace the transmission with a heavier, dutier transmission because it wasn't made to take 400 or 500 horsepower. Maybe it was good for 250 horsepower, but not 400 or 500. And those CVT transmissions are relatively weak. You put a lot more horsepower in them, you'll probably burn the thing out. I'd leave it alone if I were you. And for anybody out there, if they want to do cheap modifications for horsepower, there really aren't any that actually work. So don't waste your money on all that crap that people try to sell you. Josh versus the Civic says, Scotty, I recently installed a new exhaust and headers on my 92 Civic. It was great for a week and now it sounds dull. What do you expect? You start changing exhausts. It starts messing with the anti-pollution system. It's a 92, but it still has an anti-pollution system. You want to check your catalytic converter. You took all that other stuff off. Could be the catalytic converter's getting a little bit clogged now from a different type of flow. You want to check the catalytic converter. You can have the back pressure tested, see if it's starting to clog it up. And if it is, you can replace it or just bypass it. It's a 92. It's so old. Probably no one's going to be emissions checking it when it's being a 92. They don't check those in Texas anymore when they're a 92. Check to see if anything has come apart on your new system. Sometimes those new systems are cheaply made and the baffle plates themselves will start bending or breaking, and then it's going to sound different because now the sound's bashing against a bent part. A lot of times guys will buy stuff on, you didn't say where you got it, but a lot of times guys will buy stuff on eBay or some cheap place where, what a deal, I got a whole exhaust system for $99. Well, the quality isn't going to be very good if it is, so you want to check that. But the first thing I would check would be the catalytic converter, and they can easily be pressure tested to see if it's starting to clog up because they got tiny little holes in them, and if you change all the rest of the exhaust, the flow pattern changed, maybe that's all clogged up now, and you're going to have to get that off too. Sergio up 7 says, Scotty, I got a concern in my car. I got a 1990 Honda Accord. My timing belt recently snapped on me while I was driving. There's lots of reasons your timing belt could snap. Let's say it was old age. Well, put another belt and drive it away and away you go. A lot of times they will snap because, let's say it's an old engine and the cam's worn out. And then eventually either you're low on oil or the cam just wears out and the cam locks up. Then, of course, the belt's going to snap because the bottom of the engine, the crank, is turning the belt, but the cam sprocket is locked in place and it'll snap right off. You got to check to see if anything's damaged in the engine. Try turning all that stuff by hand. Even something like an idler pulley, if it locks up, it'll make the belt snap, and then spin it. If it doesn't spin, you got to replace that on the belt. But you just got to make sure that there's no destruction that made the belt snap before you put it back together again. MH21P says, Scotty, I got a 2014 Lexus ES350 with only 40,000 miles. The car vibrates a lot when it's in drive, but not in neutral or park. Generally one of two things. Those are notorious for their dog bone mounts. It's the dog bone motor mount that's on the passenger side. They look kind of like a dog bone, little holes, and there's rubber inside the holes. The rubber often breaks and then they rattle. Look at that. If that's broken, go put another one on. You can easily do it yourself. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts. You unbolt them, you take it off. You don't even have to jack the car up. It's right there. Do that if that's broken. Now, if it's not that, try tuning it up. New spark plugs, air filter, stuff like that. Because if a car doesn't run right, it'll often shake a little when it's in drive, but not in park or neutral. But on those, it's often those dog bone mounts. It was just one of the cheaper designs. And since it's so easy to replace 4 bolts, you can easily do it yourself. You don't even have to pay a mechanic. Most motor mounts are a pain in the rear end. You got to jack the car up, jack the motor up, reach and halt small places. This is right on the top. You don't have to jack anything. It just sits there so you can bolt it on and bolt another one. And in places like AutoZone, they sell ones that work perfectly fine. Now, they are made in Thailand, but they make some pretty good parts in Thailand, actually. I got a Triumph motorcycle. The whole thing is made in Thailand. So, you can easily fix that yourself if the mount's broken. You can see broken rubber. When you start it up, you'll see it wiggling a little, and you'll know it's bad. C2-21 says, I got an 07 Highlander. I have a weird problem. My wife says it doesn't do it, and it's the way I have the gas pedal. But when I get the car, it shifts and runs great until I hit a different way. It'll shift from second to third and stops and jolts. And it seems worse with the AC on. It's 117,000 miles, and I had the fluid and filter changed on the transmission. Odds are you're just driving it harder than your wife, and I see that all the time. If somebody drives relatively conservatively, they're not straining the engine. You're probably giving it more gas, being harder on it, and as they wear from second to third, if it's jolting a little, it shows that you have wear. That's typical on something that's 13 years old. You'll often have some wear. When you're straining the transmission, that wear is going to start to show up. Less quickly, and it doesn't do it, but when you go faster, it does. My advice is second to third gear, just take it a little bit easier. Now, as a kid, I had a car, second gear was going out, and it was a standard transmission. You go into second, it would clunk because the synchronizer on second gear was going out. So what did I do? I'd stay in first gear longer and then shift from first to third, and I drove it years that way. Sold it to a guy, told him the same thing, and he drove it for years that way. Then he sold it to another guy. Nobody ever touched that transmission. Drove it a little bit differently. So if you ease up and it doesn't do it, be happy because you said it's four-wheel drive. It costs a fortune to pull that transmission off and rebuild it. You don't want to mess with that. And since it's Toyota, you baby it, it can still go. A lot of times it'll go another 117,000 miles if you baby it. Joe Inc. says, Scotty, my mother-in-law is an '02 Ford Explorer, 4-liter, V6. I'm trying to fix it. She keeps getting P1131, bank 1 lean. I replaced the oxygen sensor, the intake manifold, check for vacuum leaks, to no avail. First thing you want to start is check the fuel pressure and the fuel injectors. If one bank is running lean, something's clogged on that side on the fuel system, that'll make it run lean. You might even have a bad injector on that side. It can't be something that reflects the whole car because they would be lean on both sides. So you said you checked for vacuum leaks and you couldn't find any. You put a new intake manifold and that didn't help it. The last thing that it could be, and you want to pray it's not that, especially if it runs a little bit poorly, the actual head gasket or a valve spring is going inside the engine. And then that side will run bad because that side of the engine's damaged, but the other side isn't. Start with the fuel brusher and checking the fuel injectors. Pray it's just a bad injector. You might even try some fuel injector cleaner in a tank. What the heck, it doesn't cost much. And if that didn't work, we mechanics have a machine that's a pressure cleaner, and we put it directly on the fuel rail, and it runs pure injector cleaner through the injectors on the vehicle without taking it apart. And if one of them's clogged, it can often clean it up, and then it won't run lean because it'll get the clog out. Then it'll be able to spray the right amount of gas and not too little that it might be doing right now. Two Minds says, Scotty, I took my 2010 Honda Pilot EXL to the dealer. Sometimes I go for a steering noise. They initially replaced the power steering pump and the noise came. They changed the power steering hoses, but it didn't solve it. They changed the tensioner, but it's still making a noise. If they did everything correctly and used good parts, your steering rack is going out. The power steering pump builds up high pressure, goes through the hoses, and goes to the power steering rack. Then when you turn it, it pushes the extra pressure to one side and gives you power. When you turn it the other way, it pushes it to the other side. You get noise if that's got too much back pressure built up. So it could easily be your rack is out now. A lot of times guys use rebuilt power steering pumps. they often make noise. If it's a brand new Honda power steering pump, yeah, that's not the problem because they're well made and they're brand new. But over the years, I have had more customers have a whiny power steering system. They go to a discount auto parts store and they buy a rebuilt pump for $100, put it on the whining stiller, and the only problem is it was a poorly rebuilt pump. When they rebuild those pumps, generally all they do is take them apart, put new seals because they were leaking. They don't take them apart, put new bearings and all this stuff on them. If you got one that whines, it's still going to whine when you sell it to somebody else. With power steering pumps, my philosophy is if you really want one that's quiet and that works, buy a new one. Now, if you don't care about noise and it just doesn't work, you could try a rebuilt one. It might work perfectly fine. It might whine, but it might work. In your case, you don't like the noise, so odds are you got a bad rack unless they sold you a bad pump. Ask them if it was new or rebuilt. If it was rebuilt, demand another rebuilt one or a new one saying, hey, it didn't fix my problem. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.